How's it going, everyone? It is I, Anime Outlet, and this is part 1 of What If Deku Had Kaioken. And now before I start this What If off, I would like to thank Danushi, a link in the description to their channel, for making the thumbnails for this series. And also, please put your What If suggestions down in the comment section below. And now, let's begin. Hundreds of years in the future, Ki would end up evolving into what quirks are known as today. However, Ki would end up getting weaker and weaker as time went on because the quirks would just get stronger and stronger, and there was little need for the Ki that was still remaining to be left there. So Ki would end up being lost through generations. However, with the quirkless people having no quirk to hold them back, the Ki flowed easily throughout all of them, as this is what Izuku would end up having, as he would end up being born quirkless, as a test that was done right out of birth would end up showing that. So, from the very first day of his life, Izuku was seen as a failure, someone without a quirk and without a future, someone who was going to be left on the streets and would end up dying at a young age, all just because he was labeled as quirkless. He didn't have a quirk, he didn't have a superpower to look forward to getting when he turned to the age of 4. And so Izuku would end up growing a very hard life. However, his mother would try to give him the best life he possibly could have. She didn't grow up with the best of quirk either, having a very, very weak telekinesis quirk. However, this is all something that would cause Izuku much enjoyment, as he really wasn't allowed to go outside very much because Inko had saw him getting picked on a lot of times when Izuku would go outside to play with his so-called friends. So Izuku would get a lot of enjoyment from watching videos on sites like YouTube or just watching his mother entertain him with her telekinesis quirk. However, one day would drastically change his and his mother's life forever, as Izuku would end up being dropped off at school, as he would end up walking into the classroom, as there sat everyone in a circle around a singular kid. And this kid was known as Katsuki Bakugo, as Izuku would walk up towards Bakugo before sitting down like all of the rest of the children, as he would ask another kid much like him, who was also quirkless, his only friend left in the class, who still hadn't yet to get a quirk, as this kid would end up telling Izuku how Bakugo had just developed his quirk, as Izuku would lean in to see what he was talking about, as he would see sparks flying all over the place, as he would see Bakugo's hands swelling up, as Bakugo would end up looking down still in amazement, as all these different sparks and crackles and pops would just pop out of Bakugo's hands, as Bakugo would scream and jump up in excitement. "I'm gonna be the #1 hero someday! I just know it! With a quirk like mine, it will be easy!" As Izuku would marvel in amazement at how cool Bakugo's quirk was, and this would end up being the downfall of Izuku's happy days, as this was where Bakugo had finally gained the confidence to where he would start doing something that he would never end up regretting, as he would end up loving what he did in his past, as he would end up bullying quirkless kids all throughout the school. They weren't in a very well-known quirkless community, so there was very few of them. Izuku and his friend were the only ones there. And so Izuku would end up walking out to the playground one day after school, waiting for his mother to pick him up, as he would end up seeing Bakugo picking on his young friend, as Izuku would rush over, still wanting to be a hero, admiring someone such as All Might, wanting to come in and save the day just like him, would run in and push Bakugo aside before offering his friend a hand, as Bakugo would then glare right back at Izuku before yelling at him, "How dare you do that, you useless Deku! Don't you know your place? You're just a stepping stone beneath my feet. This is why I hate quirkless people like you," Bakugo would say before charging at Izuku and pushing him straight to the ground, before picking him up, dangling him above the ground by his shirt collar. As Izuku would be looking at Bakugo before looking back at his friend as if telling him to run, but his friend was still in shock, not able to move off of the ground. As Bakugo would end up tossing Izuku up and then sending an explosion right into his chest. As Izuku would be sent flying backwards before his head would slam into a metal pole from the playground that was right behind them. As Izuku would then fall back to the ground before slamming his head back down onto the ground. As Bakugo, not even in shock at all, would walk up to Izuku before kicking him over, as his face would now lay face up. As Bakugo would then smile down at what he had done before saying back to his lackeys that were standing behind him, grinning after seeing what had happened to Izuku, "Ah, poor little Deku here couldn't even survive one small explosion." As Bakugo would show a tiny sign of remorse through his eyes, but Izuku's lifeless, dead eyes would stare back at him. As Bakugo would then walk away, not caring about what Izuku had just become, as his friend would end up seeing what had happened before rushing away, not wanting to see what Bakugo had done to Izuku, as his friend would end up rushing home to his house and telling his mom to please move after telling her the countless bullying things that had happened, but not telling her what had happened to Izuku. As Izuku's mother, Inko, would end up arriving to the school before running over and out throughout the school property looking for Izuku. He couldn't have gone much farther than the playground, as he told his mother he was going to be waiting by the steps, but he was drawn away from that by Bakugo bullying his only friend. As Inko would end up rushing over to the playground, seeing Izuku's lifeless husk as she would drop to her knees, staring lifelessly at Izuku's lifeless eyes, as her eyes would then just drain of all color and emotion. She would just be left there staring before she would march into the school building, demanding to see someone, as they would come out to see Izuku's lifeless body, as she would continue yelling and screaming at them, as she was now frantic and emotional. Her only child had just died, as she was now looking at his body sitting there lifeless, as her husband had already left her because of Izuku's quirklessness, and now her only son is gone. She's known nothing more than producing a quirkless child, and now that very same quirkless child she held so close to her had now just died right before her. So she would end up yelling for the school to do something. How could they let this happen to her baby? As we would end up teleporting up to a random place, as Izuku would end up looking around. Izuku would see a very huge man sitting in a desk before him, as the man would end up pitying Izuku after seeing how his fate was sealed, before he would offer Izuku a chance to be taken to a road called Snake Way, as he could end up gaining something much like a cork if he were to travel there, as the man pitied Izuku and didn't want such a young soul to just have his life only be known by bullying and death such at an early age. So Izuku would end up being taken to the Snake Way, as the driver driving him there would end up pitying Izuku even more, knowing that Izuku, who was only 4 years old, would not even be able to manage to get halfway to this. He just doesn't understand why he would end up being allowed to go on this place to King Kai's planet. Izuku would really just be confused, as the person would drop Izuku off by Snake Way, as he would end up being told to just walk over and throughout this way, keeping on the road, and if he falls, he'll be stuck in the underworld forever. However, if he continues on going, he'll be met with a cork that he can end up getting through training. So Izuku would end up walking for thousands of miles throughout the Snake Way, as his dream and his thirst to become a hero shined throughout his entire body. He wanted to become a hero, and nothing was going to let that stop him. As his work ethic was tireless, he would continue on going throughout this place, wanting to gain a cork, and he has yet to even realize that he even died yet, just thinking this is some random place he was dropped off at. So Izuku would end up making it towards the end, after months of traveling, as he would be barely crawling as he would finally reach the end before looking around and seeing a small planet. As we then teleport to the small planet, we see Goku, who's been dead for well over 100 years now, would end up sensing a massive amount of ki and would end up looking up towards the end of the Snake Way before going over and telling King Kai what he had sensed, as King Kai would end up looking over at Snake Way, also sensing it too, as Goku would then instant transmission right up to there before seeing a kid barely crawling, looking up towards the planet, as Goku would then pick up the kid and would then travel back to King Kai's planet, as Izuku would then end up sit down, feeling a massive amount of pressure going down on his body. He was already weak enough, and now to have this even bigger times gravity from what he was used to on Earth was just insane to him, as King Kai would end up just being in shock. It took Goku months to even make it there to his planet, and he didn't ever think someone like a kid could even do this, as Izuku would look up towards King Kai and Goku before saying he was promised a cork, as King Kai would look over towards Goku, as Goku would explain how Ki had evolved into corks throughout the years that he had been just deceased, as King Kai would nod his head before looking down at Izuku. Well, we can't give you a cork, but we can help you train something deep inside of you. It's something known as ki. So, Goku, why don't you go ahead and help him get started? You already know the basics. I mean, you know much further than that, but help him learn. I'm gonna go do something else. As King Kai would end up walking off, as Goku would end up sitting down next to Izuku, as Izuku would end up just trying to get up, but would not be able to because of how strong the gravity was on King Kai's planet. As Goku would end up telling Izuku how cool it was that he was able to get here, and as Goku would then start to explain what exactly ki was to Izuku. So you're telling me I have a lot of ki, Izuku would say, as Goku would quickly answer. Well, yes, but that doesn't exactly mean you are very powerful. It's all with the control that you have of your ki. That's really what makes you strong. As Goku would end up teaching Izuku how to exactly stand up, as he would end up barely being able to crawl, as Goku would say that is a much needed improvement, as Izuku would end up starting to crawl around on the ground. Any movement you can have to gain strength is good enough, Goku would end up telling Izuku, as Izuku would continue on moving. Months later, Izuku would end up having the knowledge of the Kaioken and a lot of other techniques that involved ki, as with the combination of Goku and King Kai training Izuku, Izuku was able to learn a lot from the masters of such groups, as Izuku would end up being told that they have had something waiting, as Izuku would end up looking over at Goku, as Goku would end up telling Izuku how he felt sorry for how he just had to die, and that he's been saving these things for quite a while. As Goku would then grab all of the Dragon Balls from his backpack, he was able to bring them to the other world, wanting to have them so if he ever needed to, he could wish to just come back to life. However, he thought it was a perfect chance to wish Izuku back to life, as Izuku just shouldn't have died there, as he would end up summoning Shenron and would then wish Izuku back to life. As Shenron would do this, as Izuku would end up appearing now years in the future. Izuku was now just about 14 or 15 years old, right about the start of the My Hero Academia anime, as Izuku would end up walking to his mother's address, wanting to know if she still lived there, as Izuku would end up walking there, as he would end up knocking on the door. However, no one would end up answering, as he would knock on the door again before noticing the door was slightly opened, as he would open it up to see the entire just room slash just apartment was completely empty. There was no signs of life at all. No furniture, no carpet, TV, or anything. The lights were off and didn't work. Izuku would try to turn the faucet on, but this wouldn't even work either. As the faint memories of Izuku's mother were already fading, the one thing he did remember was the apartment number and just building he lived in, and now his mother wasn't there at all. Was she dead, or what happened to her? Izuku wasn't able to remember, as the few memories that he still had left of his mother, he couldn't remember her face at all. He could only remember slight just occurrences of her voice as well, as he had just spent the past 11 or 12 years with King Kai and Goku, and so he didn't really have much memories remaining of his mother. So Izuku would end up just stumbling around as he would end up hearing an explosion, as Izuku would end up rushing where to he found the explosion, as he would end up looking into an alleyway, seeing Bakugo Katsuki just being stuck in a sludge villain. Of course, Izuku had almost forgotten what Bakugo looked like. I mean, he didn't really forget what Bakugo looked like. He remembers everything about Bakugo, but Bakugo has completely changed. It's been basically 10 to 11 years since Izuku had died by the hands of Bakugo, and so Izuku would not even recognize who Bakugo was. There was a slight similarity, but nothing that would throw Izuku off. So Izuku would end up rushing towards the sludge villain before powering up a ki attack right in his hand, as he would slam this ki attack right into the sludge villain, as the sludge villain would end up expanding before exploding, sending sludge flying everywhere, as Izuku would end up grabbing the now passed out Bakugo before handing them to just the ambulance that had already arrived, as Izuku would end up walking off the scene, as Izuku would continue on walking, not knowing what he could do. Izuku can manage, I would say, around times 3 or times 4 Kaioken. He can't do anything too serious like times 20 like Goku could, as Goku is a Saiyan, and Saiyans do have a leg up against humans, and since Izuku is still a human, he really doesn't have the Saiyan blood within him, as he really just couldn't manage to do a lot of the Kaioken. However, Goku and King Kai had learned easier ways to manage higher levels. However, Izuku couldn't manage anything above 10. He could go into Kaioken times 10 for only a short few seconds before he would end up passing out. So that's basically the level of power that Izuku has at the start of the anime. So Izuku would end up saving Bakugo, as Izuku would end up walking away, as Bakugo would be treated until he would end up waking up, demanding to be let out of the ambulance, not wanting to go to the hospital, as he would end up walking away, as All Might would then jump out of nowhere, appearing right in front of Bakugo, who was now miles away from the scene. "It was very brave of you, young man, for surviving from that sludge villain," as All Might would end up thinking, it's too bad I couldn't find the one who saved him, but this will have to do. I've seen how powerful his quirk is, and with a combination of with one for all, he'll most surely become the number one hero and save everyone. Most definitely defeat All for One, All Might would end up thinking in his head. Now, please, tell me what your ideals are. Do you wish to become a hero? As Bakugo, now seeing his idol, would lie through his teeth, saying how he admired him since a very young age and wanted to save everyone he could, never wanting to see anyone get bullied or targeted by some powerful, just meathead menace, as All Might would end up smiling down. "So, it appears your ideals are one with mine. We all want to save as many people as we possibly can. And so, young, what's your name again?" "Oh, Katsuki Bakugo." Bakugo would then smile, the first time he had smiled in almost a year, as he would end up seeing All Might say, "How about this, Katsuki Bakugo? Why don't you become my successor?" As Bakugo's jaw would end up dropping. What did you just say, All Might? And that's where part 1 of What If Deku Had Kaioken is going to be left off. Part 2 is coming out tomorrow at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, so don't forget. I thank you all for watching. I hope you did enjoy this part, and I hope you all do enjoy the series. Once again, shout out to Damnushi, link in the description to their channel for making the thumbnails for this series. I'd also like to ask you all to put your what if suggestions down in the comments section below. I thank you all for watching once again, and goodbye.